giving up on that. Let me call the meeting, I have called the meeting to order. We are being recorded. Anyone else in the audience wish to record? So, as you know. Roll call, Mr. Secretary, can I have a roll call, please?
Clerk.
Oh, Mr. Clerk.
We have Mr. Camerano, Mrs. Cattouli, Mrs. Donahue, myself, and the vice chair, Mr. Heath. We have a call.
Okay, the chairman is indisposed tonight. Mr. Gray is in Montana tonight. And at least one of the other members had a commitment that he was unavailable. Hopefully the other member will show up somewhere during the course of the session. First thing on the agenda was the executive session with the Board of Selectmen for the purpose of discussing budget matters related to staffing, labor contracts, current litigation, and litigation potentials. They have, at the last night, announced that they have decided not to come tonight. All right, there's been some pretty extensive conversations that have occurred today. When we go into our executive session, I will bring you up to date on those from our perspective, okay, what I can discuss. So we are not having that executive session. Citizens' participation, do we have any citizens that have anything they would like to bring before the committee? Seeing none, let's move right to the town administrator's report. The first item I have on there is a review of the financial reports that he gave us last week. If anybody has any questions, I have one word for you, please. I understand that there are seasonals involved here, et cetera, but are we confident that they will make their budget on time, at the appropriate level? It is partially my understanding that we do have some people who are out for legitimate reasons, for which we're having to use overtime, et cetera. All right, and I know that we're trying to make sure that we come in on budget, but some of the overtime, et cetera, is not really under our control. And the question is, will we be all right by year end?
We currently have 5 openings in the police department on there, including 2 retirements that cost us $60,000 in payouts.
Have those occurred already,
Yes.
those retirements?
You wouldn't see them in there.
Right.
They would have been officially January last month.
So they are no longer on duty at all?
Correct.
All right, and what grade are they?
They were sergeants, so 2 people had to be moved up to sergeants, which means including for whatever reason, there's 5 openings at patrolman. I believe we also had 1 more retirement. I don't know, we just received the letter. I don't know exactly where they fit in it because it's not a normal situation.
How do the retirements affect us, budget-wise? I mean, does it wind up costing us more money because of overtime, or there's a difference in pay grades, so it's no problem? I mean, what is it?
No,
how does it impact us?
The retirements, to be blunt, are brutal to us, especially with the ones that are retiring currently. They were the last 2 that were paid out 100% of their sick leave. That's been through collective bargaining. Those have changed during the contracts. So when you look at it, you have 2 people, each one of them give a value of $30,000 for their retirement, which means you have now paid $30,000. You can't fill the position because you can't afford it to, and you're filling it with overtime. And if the state doesn't have the availability through the civil service, and you don't have people that you can transfer in there. So retirements, normally you would consider them a good thing. You'd be able to save the money. But this is a tough situation.
Are there slots available in the state police training schools? I heard that for a while they were closed.
I don't believe that there are any slots.
So if we were to hire somebody who's not really been, unless it's a transfer from another police department.
You'd only be able to receive a transfer right now, is my
At this point.
understanding. I could be speaking incorrectly. I don't have the facts to verify that. That's my current understanding.
Okay. Thank goodness somebody else can ask a question. Go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Do we not plan, are these unplanned retirements? When we build a budget, do we not have any inkling that people are gonna retire, we plan accordingly in that budgeted number for the event of their retirement, or are these so unpredictable that we just don't plan for them?
Here's the sad part, we can't afford to plan for it. We don't have the room in the budget. Although it almost makes more sense to have that in there for when it does happen, we don't have the room to do it. What you would have to do right now at every single level is lay an employee off and just keep their salary on there in order to plan for retirement. So
How
you
much
get a two
notice
for-
do we have?
You receive, they can retire at any time.
So you may, I guess, there's no way of knowing in the budget process for sure that anyone's gonna come to you during the course of the next 12 months and say, I'm retiring.
There's some that are available, there's some, I'll put it this way, I've got one employee that's been working since 1973. Could have, if the pension's the only thing that matters, could have gone out with the pension years ago.
Right, but
So,
they don't have to give you any advance notification under the pension plan. They can just walk up and say, I'm gonna retire in 30
yeah,
days.
they'll have their pension calculated out on there and they can give you the information. Some of them will depend on their accruals. Some of the unions accrue monthly, and by accruals, I mean vacation time and sick as such. The police unions accrue at the beginning of each calendar year,
For the entire year.
for the entire year. So you can almost be certain if there's gonna be a retirement, it'll be the first week of January.
Mr. Worthing, did you have a question?
I didn't.
Oh, I'm sorry,
Go ahead.
no, I'm sorry, John, I missed you.
Frank, through you, I believe I saw in the newspaper the other day that there was openings for training for fire and police. I'm not sure if it was in the newspaper, in the Herald for statewide, I thought it was. Could be wrong, but I thought it was in, for training.
They were reopening it. I know the town of Wareham is 14 policemen short. One of the problems were that they were accepting no new recruits to the police training school because it wasn't running. It wasn't operating, didn't have no money. And about 3 weeks ago, they announced that they were going to reopen it.
I thought I saw it in the
All right,
paper.
now the
real
question is how do they allocate out the slots?
recent. That
Okay,
was
that's
just
the problem.
one statement I want to make. Excuse me, could you go over, I didn't quite get a chance to write it down. You said how many police were retiring?
We had 2 retirements in January, and I received another letter of retirement. We have one officer that's out, well, we have 2 other officers that are out on leaves, various types of leaves.
Okay, now, through you, Frank, again. Go over the retirement numbers again. You said that 30,000 for each of the 2 that already gave you notice?
For the 2 that already gave notice.
And do you know any price on the one that just gave you notice?
I believe that will be 0.
Okay, now, out of that 30,000, what, besides that, do we know what we have to pay them?
Now,
Is there a
there will be-
percentage or anything, or just?
That's all vacation and sick leave. buddy.
Okay. Then what, out of the retirement, we still have to pay, what is, any idea what number that is? What percentage of their pay or a number?
No, it wouldn't change our, what Plymouth County already assesses us at.
Okay, so that's not gonna cost us anything, it's already in Plymouth County, their retirement fund?
Whatever actuarial reports they've done, they've essentially planned on a certain amount of
I mean, that's not an
retirements.
extra cost to us right at the moment, just these 30,000.
Correct.
Okay, and you said the police force is now how many short, or what do we need to hire?
I believe we have 5 openings at the
5
moment.
openings
At the patrolman level.
at the patrolman level, and that's the only thing open right at the moment, is 5 patrolmen?
Correct.
And what is budgeted? What's the question I'm looking for? What do we have budgeted to replacement? Do we have, I mean, out of these 5, do we have the money to hire anyone? Because we're losing 2 salaries, correct?
You're losing, to put it, those are all budgeted positions. However, when you have the positions that aren't filled, they're being filled with overtime.
I understand that. So, obviously, if you hire, new overtime will go down, correct?
Yeah, if you hire, Yeah, but don't forget, if you're bringing somebody in, it's through the academy, the training period is 9 months, once you even have them here, so you're not necessarily reducing overtime right away. If it was a lateral transfer, you would be okay. However, if you're taking somebody through the academy and through all the training process, you would not effectively reduce overtime for 9 months.
So we're 9 months away, no matter what you look like, to hire any patrol, unless it's a transfer from another town. So is the overtime costing us more than the salary paid to the two officers leaving, or 3 officers leaving? In other words, is it, I use small numbers, we're paying $100 to pay these people now, is overtime costing us 120, is it costing 80? I'm just using that number. Any idea, or is that too hard to figure?
It isn't too hard to figure, but I don't have it off the top of my head, but I would say it's a fair assumption that right now we're paying more in overtime than we would normally for the salaries. So it is one of the reasons we brought in 5, I believe, was it 5 or more officers during the?
Started 7, I thought, originally,
7.
but then one didn't come, so one was 6, I think.
It
But
was
7
split
roughly.
through some new and some lateral transfers, at least 2 lateral transfers
2.
as well. Reason that was brought in was to help change the overtime as well as safety issues.
Okay.
They have I believe the chief went over it a little bit, but they have minimum staffing for shifts as well. And there is a safety number that you want to have X amount of policemen out there for backup. So, and we all think that everybody enjoys overtime and really wants it, but when, I think if any of us have done it, you start working enough overtime, you'll give up the money just to get a good night's rest or be with your family.
Also details, I mean, there's a lot of stress on that department, from what I can see, it appears to be.
Marilyn?
Just a quick question. Thank
I'll
you.
come back to you if you want.
Thank you, Dominic, because those are all the questions I wanted to ask to
Yeah.
just get clear, and this is probably still more into hands-on, but with regard to detail work, number one, there was a question a while back about the revenue that comes in off of that. Have we accounted for that? Do we?
The revenue that comes in minus there's an admin fee in there, I think 10%.
Okay.
So I believe each patrolman is $40 an hour, minimum of 4 hours. If you go past 4 hours, I believe it goes to $60 an hour as an automatic.
Okay.
$4, 4 hours. That goes in, there's essentially a revolving account where the officers are paid out of that, but then the funds, so if you have the electric company is paying for the detail, that goes directly to there. So it's not paid out of the budget of the police department. So that's what I think needs to get, detail pay. does
That's
not
what I
come-
wanted. Detail pay doesn't go through the budget,
Correct.
and the overtime hours don't go through the budget on the detail pay.
Well, the detail pay wouldn't be overtime, they're not working.
It's separate, okay, so
Correct.
detail is not
So
overtime.
we make a small amount of money on there because again, we charge an administration fee. I don't have the exact number of what that is, but if you think about it, if somebody does an 8-hour shift at roughly, $30, $40 an hour, 10% of that, and however many details we do would be the number.
Thanks.
Mr. McDonald?
Okay, let me try this another way. We have basically an accounts receivable, what we're charging, basically what we're charging out to, if you say the water company or the electric company, what we're charging out to them. And we're paying the officers from basically the same account.
Correct.
Has that been reconciled?
They do reconcile that, and they also changed as part of the last audit, changed the method in which they're doing collections. Many of the ones that have in the past have not paid right away need to pay before the details are going out there.
All right.
They've made sure that they're doing a good job on that one.
So the other side of that is if we're charging $40 an hour, what are we paying the officers?
The officers are paid directly, that doesn't.
What, are they paid the $40?
They would probably, if it's $40, yeah, I'd say they get $40
All right, so the
an hour.
10%
Less
admin
than
fee,
10%?
what are the 10%, is it
On
less?
top.
It's on top.
Okay, that's where that's where I was going with that one.
It's on top. Now, that was all, as Greg pointed out, part of the last year's audit raised that issue. So I would expect in this year's audit and management letter that would be addressed as having been resolved or still as an open item. So I suggest we wait till that comes in before we address that any further. The key issue is, I think, was the fact that it does not affect the budget. Detail time does not affect it. Tom?
Through you, Frank, that 10% that we're charging for the administration fee, is there a profit margin in there? Is it costing us 10%? I mean, think about it, if it's only costing us 10%, the town should make money out of that. If it's costing us 10% to do the paperwork and to do the accounting, to do everything like that, that's 20%. We should be making a profit off that. That's my opinion. And whether or not it is or it isn't, I don't know if that 10% is cost effective. It might cost us 12% to do it. We're losing. A detail for another company, a paid company for our, employees, should be a profit. Has anyone looked into that?
I haven't, I don't know.
Any way to figure, any way to figure out if our cost is more than 10% or less than 10%?
Well, we'll have to figure out two things.
Okay.
Whether there is an amount that you are legally allowed to charge, and whether it is cost effective what we are. If you're set at a minimum, then, or a maximum floor ceiling, and we're not at the ceiling, we can look into that.
I think we've raised the question that we can't expect them to answer on the spot.
No, I understand that, I'm just throwing something out.
And you've raised a good question, and I'll
And I'm not putting you
suspect you will be ready.
I'm not putting you on the spot, I didn't mean to put you on the spot, that's not what I meant to do here. You saying that there could be limitations, that statewide, is that a state thing?
To be blunt,
Yeah, no, go ahead.
through you, Mr. Chair, I was going to say.
It's up to you.
It's all right.
At this point, you don't have to
No,
deal with it.
to be blunt, you will often find that the things that you think are black and white are gray. So every time I've thought there's a simple solution or there's a simple answer, I've found either a state law, a charter piece, or something that blocks
Nothing
the
is
simplicity
easy.
of
You've
it.
got bylaws and policies, but
Bylaws,
that's okay.
I think we should look into making money off it, that's my opinion.
I think in general, you've been looking at almost everything to see what opportunities exist. I think that, and I think it's ongoing too, from what I'm hearing from department heads, is that, they're all looking at this point.
I've also, for this committee, I've asked all the departments to give me a chart of what they bring in for revenues, and then what their salary and expenditures are, to give you a net number of what their cost is to the town. It's not going to include the health and the benefits part of it. It's just a very simple chart when you look at each department on there. So just give you an idea of what each department brings into the revenues versus their simple cost, if you will, on there.
Again, we're addressing the month, year-to-date through January, so we'll hold to any budget items, hold till we hit the next item. Are there any other, pardon?
I wish the numbers that you saw there were through January, they're through November.
I know that.
We wish they were through January.
We wish they were through January as well, yes. Any other questions on the January reports? Anyone else have a question? If you would, on budget matters, it seems like every time I talk to you, you tell me another number, another thing that's come. What I can report to everybody is I did receive from the school department today. It's not on the agenda because it was in the last 24 hours. All right, a memo from Dr. Rabinovich, CC in the Finance Committee, that they voted on January 30th. On January 30th, they voted unanimously for a school budget of $28,619,381. Of that, $1,601,056 was non-net, $27,018,325 was net school spending. So again, the number is $28,619,000. That does not include the upper technical leaders. That is solely what the school committee has approved. Do we have any other budget items?
We will, from the Upper Cape Cod Tech, we've not received any official word from them, but it is my understanding that their assessment to us is approximately $229,000 higher than was anticipated from the number we've been provided, and it will be closer to 3.1 million, which will be a 19.35% increase.
Mr. McDonald?
You're gonna get tired of calling on me after a while. Clearly, we're not going to vote for that. If we can't even fund our schools, why would we fund 19% more to Upper Cape? That's one issue. Well, there are ways, and that's what we have to come to, is a decision on how we approach this, because if we're the only one of the 5 towns that says no, we got a $3.1 million problem. If we go to the other towns and have them, and this is from a discussion I had earlier with our town administrator, if we go to the other towns and we get 3 towns, a majority to say no, it helps us, sort of, but they have to go back through the budget process. Then they can go back and say, you know what, we don't want 19%, we see your problem, we only want a 12% increase. Then we're gonna have to go through this problem again and again. And I'm hoping that Derek may have some ideas of how to keep from this ever-ending battle with funding Upper Cape when we can't even fund our own schools.
Mr. Cameron?
You're saying we can't fund our own school, Upper Tech is also our school. I'll just say and leave that
Well,
alone.
okay.
I'll just say and leave that alone. Upper Tech is still our school. Our students still go there. Do you really at heart feel you're gonna get other towns to go along with that? They're not in the budget, they might not be in the budgetary problem we're in, and they're gonna tell you, God bless you, you can get it done.
Let me
I'm
help.
saying, go for it.
Cameron?
That's all I have to
If
say.
you look at that number for the school that they just gave us, you got a $2 million problem.
I
And
understand
then,
that.
no, well, let me finish. Then you add on top of that, the other $229,000 Upper Cape is now asking for. If you look at the funding for the last 5 years and the increases to the Upper Cape, and you look at our own school system, and so what are we saying? This amount of kids going to Upper Cape, we'll do whatever we can to get you an education, and the rest of the guys,
Have you, through you, Frank, have you done the math as per student, to what we pay per student here to Wareham High, to what we pay to Upper Tech, and seen the difference?
well, I'll go back and do it again, but I don't,
Right.
but-
No, before you speak, do it.
sure.
It's not a whole lot different.
Mr. Worthing?
I disagree.
Okay,
Mr. Worthing? Oh, I thought you were indicating.
I disagree.
But I just don't think that you can say Upper Tech is not our school.
But I
It is our
think,
school.
I think it ought to be looked at on a per pupil basis, because the 19% includes an increase in the number of students as well. So it's, what is it, an increase, what per student increase? I doubt if it's 19, I don't think it's 19%, I don't know.
I don't know. We'll have to see that along with the rest of it, but.
But if we're gonna go out and make a case to Falmouth, for instance, and we're the largest number of students in the student body at Upper Cape,
Not at all.
We did
we're gonna have a tough time making an argument.
Mrs. Dyer?
And not to knock down Larry's suggestion, because I understand his frustration where it's coming from, and I think you need to try that. But the reality is, the other towns that are involved in Upper Cape are Marion, Bourne, Falmouth, Sandwich, Wareham. If you look at, and I don't know what this year's numbers actually break out, but in the past, the per capita, the per student ratio for those towns is well above what Wareham spends per student on our in-town education. Those towns are going to just say what I've heard anecdotally on the street, which is, we're paying for our kids to go to school, and we will pay for them to go to school wherever they need to go to school. That being said, we have to try to do everything we can do. So we better push back.
Any other comments?
Yeah,
One thing
I'll say that.
one thing that we talked about last year was asking the school committee members for Upper Cape Tech that rep from Wareham to visit with us this year and explain to us their process and what they see, and try to give us a clear explanation of why the increases, et cetera, rather than just relying on the superintendent. They're supposed to be representing the town What I'll do is the committee would like, I'll put a formal invitation out to them, all right, and ask them to come in at one of our, probably one of the next two meetings, whenever they happen to fall.
Just
Marilyn?
one quick question. The students that we send to Upper Cape, are those included in our Chapter 70 money?
I am not sure.
I think it's based on student body count, and I don't know that they're in the
I'll
student
ask,
body
I'll
count.
ask the school committee that, Jeff.
You would have to ask them. They can give us a better understanding of the formulas. Any other? Nothing else, Mr. Sullivan? Are we all set?
That's a loaded statement, I don't think.
Those are two
That's-
separate statements. Anything else? No, we are not all set.
He's predicting that his wife is going to have the baby during the blizzard.
Well, that's one of the other questions I have, is how much money do we have left to pay for the blizzard?
You'll go into deficit on there. The last report that Mr. Gifford gave us had, trying to remember the expenditures, and excuse me on there, but if we, usually per snowstorm, we're spending between 70 and 90,000. The last snowstorm that we had, with all the predictions and the way it was going, which turned out to be several inches instead of a foot, we still had to anticipate and call out people, and that still cost us money on there.
I know two of them, the very first one was 72,000, the next one I believe was 28,000, and there's been another couple of instances.
Right.
So we were down to about $100,000, so usually that seems to be the magic number when it comes to anything over 6 inches of snow.
I would say right now, we're probably looking at, for the storm, it usually costs us close to $100,000 if it comes in the way they've
We
anticipated.
can deficit spend on snow removal.
Yes, we can.
So it's not, but it's, I don't want anybody to think it's free. It will go against our tax rate, effectively reducing our available monies next year.
I also know that on hurricanes, we get FEMA reimbursement. When it goes to blizzard level, is there any type of mechanism that says, okay, this is not a normal snowstorm, and
Actually,
We'll see.
we received from MEMA, the Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency, a PowerPoint, and I'm sorry, I'm just downloading it here because I thought it was pretty interesting with the title of their PowerPoint, where I'm hoping they remember that they write this sort of stuff. Historic winter storm is what they're calling it.
okay.
So if this becomes any sort of federal declaration of emergency and such, there will be reimbursements.
The word historic has to be involved in order for it to qualify, is what you're saying.
Well, I'm saying if they're calling it historic, they may, hopefully that will, they'll start triggering some of the aspects of it. One of the big things that we found out from the reimbursements now is that FEMA is reimbursing for straight time and not just overtime. So the straight time during the storms and such is being paid out as well.
There was some question as to whether or not they would start paying for preparation time. They made any progress on that, or are they still?
I haven't heard about that. The big one is the straight time.
Yeah, okay.
on
There was
that,
a
so.
question about that.
Chick said that at that point, the last storm was that they don't pay for the prep time.
Right. It
They
was
don't, but there was some discussion about maybe they would start.
in a way, we almost were punished for being proactive and making sure that more trees didn't hit our power lines. So.
Yes. That's why I asked. Anyone else have any more questions before we thank Mr. Sullivan for? Mr. West?
When do we start to say budget for $2 million less? When do we say, okay, this is what we're facing, how do we live within our projected means? When does that get attacked?
Mr. Sullivan, do you want to address that, or?
I would say last month. We're working with the school, met with them and such. I'm meeting with Dr. Ivanovich tomorrow. And if you're speaking from this committee, you've had the all-day budget presentation from the school and from the town. The budget that I submitted was until we received the news from Upper Cape Cod Tech, with essentially a balanced budget on there. I'm not saying what the school's asking for isn't needed or warranted. But we're gonna have to look, if you're looking to remove $2 million from the town side,
In total, just so that the whole thing
if you're
floats.
looking, because that's, right now, we have an unbalanced budget of effectively $2 million higher for the school needs, and the only place you'd be able to remove that's from the town side, if you were not reducing the school.
But the school is part of the, I mean, all I'm saying is,
We,
and
What's the
maybe,
process
yeah,
from here?
what's the process from here to say, okay, so at least you could go in front of the town and say, to get to, $2 million less, this is what we have, this is what we're gonna look like. And at that point, we got, to get there, we gotta go through a series of options and prioritize them, and then say, okay, this is it. And we haven't got any capital in there, there's no maintenance in there, I mean, it's,
At the selectmen's meeting last night, all right, the chairman of the board of selectmen discussed the fact that he and the town administrator and the superintendent and the chairman of the school committee, all right, are working on it, all right? There are discussions going on, all right?
have you involved in those?
No. Okay, there was some suggestion by him that maybe the FinCom at some point should be involved. Again, it's the past process, let's put it this way, 2 prior years, whether I wanted to or not, I was involved. One, I was the chairman of the committee, I was on an ad hoc committee, all right? And it always seems to boil down to the same thing. Eventually, it still comes down to the town administrator and the superintendent have to work together to try to come out with a set of numbers talking to their particular boards. All right, and from there, we go to town meeting, and hopefully at that point, we're balanced, right, or we have agreement, right? Last year, it was done a little differently. We were asked by the town administrator, 4 individuals were asked to assist him with recommendations, all right, which they did. But again, it still boiled down to what the superintendent and the town administrator came up with. One of those solutions, the solution 2 years ago, was there was an excess of the healthcare trust fund. If we made the holiday, we would be able to use, you know, well, we would have a savings.
$1,600,000 this year, how much of that is because of the holiday?
That's a whole different ballgame. I think we need to wait till we hear from the auditors, all right, the status of the trust fund. I'm just talking about what the history was. There appeared to be, at that time, almost $3 million. And the question was how we're going to deal with it. A healthcare holiday appeared to be advantageous. All right, that was the way we could provide all the services. That was the agreement that the two executives, shall we say, agreed upon. And then the boards, the FinCom, the school committee, and the board of selectmen, all right, to some degree agreed that was the way we had to go. Town meeting approved it. Last year was, same type of thing. There were some discussions that went on. We had opportunities, and we took them. But again, it always comes down to them, and when they're ready, they bring it to the appropriate people.
So, I mean, I just would think that they would want people from the finance committee in there while it's going on, so that you could raise our hands and say, it's not sweet, but we certainly concur with the decisions that have been made.
Yes, but again, it's up to them whether or not they invite us.
Mr. Chair, I think you, as the finance committee, you have the right of First Amendment for the budget article on the town meeting floor.
Yes, we do. There has been in the past some discussion about whether or not the finance committee should have its own budget. I think in every instance where that's occurred, not just in this town, but any other town, all that's resulted in is absolute chaos for the particular municipality. Political fights, arguments, walkouts. I mean, I don't care which town you're dealing with.
I'm not looking to fight, I'm.
No, I'm just saying that, coming up with a separate budget, all right, we've talked in the past that, yeah, we have right of First Amendment, but that needs to be very specific, and yes, we're going to start with whatever budget they put out there. Okay? Mr. Camerano?
Frank, through you, is probably a question that maybe you can answer now. Does our charter, does our charter say whether or not we have to have a balanced budget at town meeting?
By
Is
law, in the state of Massachusetts, we have to have a balance. Oh, do we have to have it by town meeting?
Yes.
We have to have it by year end, I believe, otherwise I can't set the tax rate. June 30th.
So we can actually have town meeting with an unbalanced budget.
You can leave town meeting with an unbalanced budget and leave it up to the town administrator to balance the budget. However, there's some parts of that, whatever you voted in on certain lines, I believe with the school, and I may not be able to amend that one. So you'd be asking me as to where I would want to make cuts from.
You gotta print your own bucks. We gotta have Wareham bucks.
So let me just see if I can put my finger on this a little better. We go through town meeting, and for some oddball reason, before town meeting, we do not have a balanced budget. That means the ball falls totally in your court, and you have all the rights to pull this off, or are there other rules that?
There's more rules than.
It always comes down to the end. The only body in the town that has the right, all right, to appropriate is town meeting. Okay, so no matter how many things, as long as he has a certain amount he can work with, and he can try to bounce it around, maybe get lucky and, have a surplus that would cover any deficit that might be there as a result of town meeting not acting. All right, but when it comes to any other additional dollar or anything, it's extremely risky to go through the October town meeting without a balanced budget. That's why you see us always try to balance in April, and then in October, you might have some adjustments.
Tweak it a little, yeah.
Tweak it a little. If you come out of the October town meeting without a balanced budget,
Right.
and the inability to prove to the state that you are going to balance it, you can't set your tax rate, correct?
You cannot set the tax rate, and this town does not
Receive state aid.
receive state aid, and it does not have the history with the Department of Revenue to even try and attempt anything.
And when we say that we would not receive state aid, that would be a meeting, that would be for, the third fiscal quarter, which would be January through March, and then March through June, so that would make the deficit even worse that we would have to make up by year end.
We would have to borrow for the revenue, which increases the deficit, and you're looking at a nightmare situation.
Okay.
Yeah, but, correct me if I'm wrong too, borrowing to pay for an operating situation is extremely difficult. And you wouldn't want to see what it would do to your credit.
Expensive.
Legal?
I was gonna say, no, it's expensive, all right? Right.
Legal to do?
Oh, yeah.
It's legal to do, but I'm telling you, you wouldn't want to pay it.
That's my second part of the question. Have we ever gone through town meeting in anyone's history that we know of? Have we ever done that? Have we gone through town meeting without a balanced budget that anyone here knows of? In our history? No? Okay, thank you.
Tom?
So from the logical point of view is that the town administrator, the school superintendent will come up with something,
Well, I agree.
submit it back to us, and I think then at that point, then we'll vet it. And if we are uncomfortable with it, then I think at that point, that's what the right of First Amendment is. If we're uncomfortable with it, then that's our right. But for us to build our own budget makes absolutely no sense. It's a time-consuming process, and at the end, who are we to tell the town administrator and school superintendent where they need to cut it? That's something, it's a difficult situation. So I anticipate, and this is why I'm looking right at our town administrator when I say that it'll probably be in the next month that we will have something in front of us that makes something close to sense, correct?
No, inappropriate question.
Okay, just,
That's an inappropriate question.
I have now been sanctioned once
No, it's
again.
it's inappropriate.
You withdraw this question.
I have to honestly say, once we get into the process, we get an awful lot of updates. All right, setting the deadlines that in the end,
It was
can't
very
be
general,
met,
it was
becomes
very
embarrassing, okay?
general, very general.
I don't want to set a deadline that other people have major influence.
Can I set a frank deadline that
No, you
says,
can't
don't
set
come to
it.
me 2 hours before town meeting and tell me you're making a change?
Oh,
Oh,
well,
come
I can't
on.
promise that.
I'm getting used to
you
that.
can't.
It's like
All
that
right, I'd like to
back
start
in the
with Marilyn, go ahead.
During the department budget hearings, I was very appreciative that you talked about the department heads, and we're talking about how they can all increase their revenues and increase fees. Are those numbers reflected in your revenue numbers here?
The increase in the MLC fees
Yeah,
and the increase in the inspectional services fees are noted in there.
okay.
They're the rough estimate, they're a little, the inspectional services errs on the side of caution on there because I really don't know, given the way our building has been going and such, what we'll do on that.
But you've already accounted for those, so.
Yeah, unfortunately,
Okay.
that's, it would be much easier for me to try and over-reflect those and increase the budget, but that's not right
It's
for
not a real
for
thing.
the finances. There's one other thing to Mr. Cameron. He said he had faith in me, which I appreciate, but when it comes to town meeting, the most powerless person on the floor is your town administrator.
It's our job to
What a
protect.
cop-out, what a cop-out. What a cop-out. The other thing I would caution everyone is, like tonight, as we go through the process, we hear about things that people are telling us are coming at us, and the numbers are not always exact at that point. So, and in the past, what happened was, we heard nothing until the number was final, right? And then we would say, well, geez, we'd like to know a little sooner, and I think we're seeing that process now. So we heard a change in the number from the Upper Cape, but we don't have the formal number, so, you know, I would ask you to be very discreet as the conversations come up. Somebody says, oh, I heard this, or, you know. So we're looking at it. We heard there's gonna be a change, but don't confirm any numbers, right, until he receives the official notifications. It's really important.
The reason I asked the question was, I would like to be able to support the budget and the town administrator and the school department and everything else with the final number. But if we're gonna sit on the sidelines until, say, here's the dog food, do you like it or don't you like it? I think that's the wrong way to go about it. I think that even if we're just auditors of the process.
The problem is we don't have the authority to be auditors of the process. We go by the town charter, which puts us in an advisory capacity. We have pretty much a general agreement that they're willing to let us advise to some degree, and they seek our opinions. But as far as like even auditing and stuff, you know, yeah, we can raise issues, et cetera, but we're strictly advisory by charter. We have no authority to go in and really do that unless we do have the power, we do have the power to examine things if we feel that inappropriate actions have been taken. But that's pretty extreme. That doesn't really give us a budget review power or an auditing power unless we think there's something wrong. Right? And then we can't exercise that. We can call various departments before us. But you don't want to do that unless you absolutely have. I mean, you wouldn't do that, in my opinion, unless you're pretty convinced that there was something seriously amiss in the procedurals. Any other questions? Any other comments?
I'm sorry, I'll let Derek comment. I don't, through you, Mr. Chairman, I don't know who's the answer to this. I don't really understand revenue generation at a municipal level. That's not my field. But I know that the town has assets. Do we have a list of other assets that can be sold?
We have properties that we can sell that we've taken through the foreclosure process. You cannot use those in the current fiscal year, they fall to free cash. We will be planning in the future some of the sales. It's not equitable to sell things up.
Those are just the tax title foreclosed properties.
I would severely caution against that because they're one-time revenues, and generally one-time revenues are targeted to capital items. All right, if we start targeting them to operational items, then we're gonna have a lot of beat cops. All right, we're gonna have a lot of kids walking to school from 15 miles, not 1 or 2 miles or something. Which I'm not saying anybody is, but one-time revenues being used for operational is pretty tough. We saw that with what happened with
With the health trust.
the health trust.
Yeah, you see back in December when we certified the free cash, I warned, shouldn't say warned, that's I just said, not to caution, not to be giddy over that, we're going to be putting that, hopefully putting that back into the health trust fund, is that we wouldn't have any free cash if it wasn't for the healthcare holiday. And that's still what I'll be asking for with the selectmen to put on the town meeting warrant.
So my memory's a little short. Has the legislation that was presented for the meals tax fully passed and been implemented, or is a date being set to implement it?
My understanding is yes, it has passed, we received that notification.
All right, has the town started complying with that legislation?
It's simple, yes, we have in our principal and debt line, we have 476,000, next year we'll have 760,000, those were for purchases of capital items, and that's what you'd use to defray the cost. Won't be available to purchase new items.
Okay.
Is part of this process that they go through is to sit down with the unions and say, we want you to pay more of the healthcare costs, we want you to take a salary cut, things of that nature?
We're not involved in the union negotiations, correct?
Yeah, but I mean,
So as you say the word union
You can't
negotiations,
say
they
that.
said
We
executive
can't talk
session,
about
and
that.
then they don't show up.
I didn't,
I said, as soon as you say that, they say union negotiation, and that means executive session, and they don't show up. They don't arrive.
We don't have the power.
well,
And there's
I mean,
nothing that we can do about it. I mean, we can't,
Hands
it's
down.
all up to them, and it's up to the board of selectmen.
And I appreciate the questions, however, you'll be treading on a dangerous territory, which will have me walk out of the meeting, because it could be a violation of collective bargaining.
He wants to
Yeah.
come anyway, so he said that.
Yeah,
I'm not
it's-
saying that in a mean way, it's
That's-
a simple.
he's obligated by law not to discuss certain issues, because they are part of negotiations that are ongoing. I know, it's not part of the business world, Tom, that's something it's set.
well, I mean, if it's 70% of the budget, it certainly has got to be something that's being considered, or we're just kidding ourselves.
It is certainly, I mean, I'm sorry, but it's certainly been considered in the past, historically, as far as you're in reference to budget negotiations and things like that. It has happened in this town in the past. And those reviews with various unions cost jobs, because the unions didn't want to take
So
a
that's-
little bit, and so they cut a few guys instead. So, yeah, it has.
That doesn't mean anything for now, though.
It doesn't mean anything for now, but has that question been asked? Oh, yeah, those questions are always asked.
I think we should stop talking about it.
I also will tell you that 2 years ago, when we had an ad hoc committee, at its very first meeting, one of the questions was asked, why are there no union people, why are there no employee representatives here? And the decision at that time was it was not appropriate, and it would raise too many potential problems when it came to labor negotiations. So, you know, they were not part of the discussions. Is that it? We're getting into dangerous territory, maybe we should let them go before we slip and fall into the quicksand.
Silence was deafening.
He doesn't want to go home.
Nice try.
She's right at that point where he's probably hiding.
Just wait a month or two, Derek,
All right.
back in your office.
Order,
You'll be coming here just with the opportunity to sleep.
Tell me I'm back. Nope.
Being taped.
Just take her, put her in the front seat, and drive down a bumpy road, you'll be all set.
Next item on the agenda.
Thank you, Derek.
Good night, Derek.
Thank you very much, Derek.
I hope I didn't ruin the open meeting law or anything of that nature.
No, there's, it's not my Tom, obviously,
All right, next item on the,
obviously, I need to tread just
next item on the agenda, so we can get home by 10 o'clock. All right, last week I gave everybody a copy of the enterprise fund guide from the Department of Revenue,
And I didn't finish my homework sheet.
which I asked everybody to take a look at, to read thoroughly, so that we could discuss it tonight. We do have problems based on that guide as to how we do handle the fund.
We do have problems?
We do have problems. One of the things is according to Department of Revenue, the enterprise fund should be it should be accounted for on an accrual basis, not on a cash basis. All right, it also gives a lot more recommendations as to how the accounting should be done. We don't do anything. It's very specific about the use of retained earnings and who has the authority to use those, who has to appropriate those retained earnings, et cetera. I want to make sure everybody understood that, because I think as we go through the articles this time, we're going to see some articles coming to us. They're going to bring a lot of these policies into question. The document I gave you, I think maybe the first 5 pages, really describe for you the fund and what has to be done. And then there's a whole bunch of technical stuff as far as entries and stuff concerned. So you really only need to read the first 5 pages to understand what the state's trying to get across. It is meant to be a freestanding organization. It is meant to pay its fair share. But again, we get into some real specifics. We can transfer monies from town departments to them, and from them to the town. However, we cannot bill. Okay, how are we supposed to know the amount of the transfer? Okay, so as you go through it, you're going to see some strange things, and you say, why can I do that? All right, it will raise the issues of administrative charges, and what really truly the state sees as the obligation of the enterprise fund to the town as a whole. All right, doesn't go into the calculation of what the features are supposed to be. It just recommends that certain things be, that indirect costs be addressed. And we partially addressed them at this time. All right, at one time they were over-addressed, then they were under-addressed, and now they're somewhat addressed. So we need more details on that. Questions? Dominic, I'm afraid to.
No.
Would like to ask one of your accounting types to explain the difference to us for accrual versus cash.
All right, the easiest way to explain it is, if I buy a service, I have something repaired, all right, and I ask Tom as a plumber to come in and fix it. He comes in, he fixes it, says, here's your invoice, okay? We get to month-end close, all right? Accrual accounting says I have to account for that invoice. I have to put it in my expenditures, even though I haven't paid it. That's accrual accounting. That's what we're used to seeing.
Cash is when you get the extra.
Cash says we're not even going to pay attention to it until the bill's paid. All right. That also gives me the opportunity of saying, "Oops, I'm over budget. Gee, do I have all my bills for this month? Oh yeah, they're all in." All right. I'm not accusing anybody of anything. It's just also very easy for these things. The process of where is the bill? Is it in the department? Has it moved to the next step? Has it been properly processed? Is everybody in agreement? Does it require a purchase order? They need to be on accrual accounting. The reason I can tell you right now, I know why they need to be on accrual accounting is that is supposed to be a management report for them as well. So they can see what their progress is throughout the year. As you read through there, they talk about line item budgeting, which says, hey, if you put X number of dollars in for chemicals and you suddenly decide that you need it for electricity, it requires the same transfer process that's required for all transfers, Board of Selectmen and the FinCom. Yes, it is very detailed. The idea being that an enterprise fund will be adequately budgeted and managed. The state has given you a vehicle, to do it. What they're saying is that it's not to be out there in free form. You should be using it to manage your business properly. All right, I think that, and we saw the report we received last week, which I raised an objection to. We saw a revenue number, and we saw an expense number, and no detail. And not only that, it was cash accounting. So we have a long way to go. The other side is for the individual who's managing it, right? If he wants to know where he stands at any given point, he has to maintain his own set of books if he really wants to know it. And it's encouraging that, and that's the last thing we want.
It's a very pointy. He brought up in his discussion, in his presentation to us, that he
Yes, all right, so, and
needs help.
that becomes part of the problem, is how is he supposed to manage his budget on a monthly basis, especially with the flows that he has over the course of the year, if he doesn't have an accrual accounting situation. That does raise some questions about supply inventories, et cetera, but, you know, there's ways that he can adjust for that. Mr. McDonald?
That's one of the things that bothers me the most about this enterprise fund, is it is more realistic to what the business world is. It's accrual accounting, it should be managed as such. I've never seen a report that breaks down, and with all businesses, you have basically the profit and loss statement and the balance sheet. Profit and loss statement is something that we need to be able to get to, but also the balance sheet, because you have retained earnings. And our grasp, I think, from the reports I've read, our grasp as a town of the retained earnings is pitiful. And therein lies your problem, when it should not be able to be touched by the town outside of the scope of what we're gonna read in here. And yet, in the past, it has been. It has been. It's been used, it hasn't gone through the proper procedures, let's say, the process. We do not manage a $6 billion business. We just don't. And we try to do it with rudimentary reports, and we just do not, we fail miserably, in my opinion.
I also seem to recall that in the statements, the audited statements we received, on the earnings statement, there was depreciation. I also remember when I read this, that depreciation is not supposed to be considered as part of this budget. So, I mean, we need to go through this thing a little bit better, ask some questions of our audit firm, all right? But, you know, as members, we need to educate ourselves on this very, very quickly and be prepared. We are probably going to see some requests well, it's a possibility, we may see some requests to use some of the retained earnings. And I know that some of the retained earnings are betterments that have been paid in advance, in understanding the debt, right? They should be restricted. However, I believe that our restricted somehow has all wound up now as unrestricted. All right, the question is, how did that happen? So there's a lot of questions here, a lot of things, you know, that need to be addressed.
The sewer department is an enterprise fund.
Yes, it is.
And the EMTs are,
EMTs are revolving, they're not an enterprise fund. They tried to be at one point, however, that's where we said they were unable to make a profit or even break even.
are there any other?
No, the only thing we have, and in most towns, it's usually sewer and water.
Yeah.
All right, some have electricity.
Yeah.
It's usually some form of utility or sanitation. Mr. Camerata?
Frank, I need help through you or from anyone else to explain a few things to us, and maybe a little over my pay grade. Okay, I'll put that list.
I'm in the same.
Mr. McDonald said he'll be glad to explain it all to you.
Page 8.
Oh, boy. Well, you got further than we did.
No, I read this thing 3 times, please.
Yeah, I know.
It's like watching paper dry, but I did read it. Okay, on page 8, it says, table 1, 3 scenarios for an enterprise budget. Now, explain to me budgeted surplus, if you read that through, how it affects the general fund and what can be used in the general fund.
It would not affect the general
Oh,
fund.
now read that and explain that to me, what that actually means then, please. When it says reimbursement to the general fund. Just, I'm not grasping that, Brett.
That's right there.
Well, it says right there, it says that it may reflect a reimbursement to the general fund to provide for a retained earnings deficit in the prior fiscal
Yeah.
year. If
If
there's
there
a
was-
deficit in any given year, the town must make up that deficit.
So,
However, then it's the obligation of the enterprise fund to repay that. It's almost a loan.
okay, so that's just a loan, so they can't.
You budget a surplus to repay what you took
I
as
understand that,
deficit
no,
last
so,
year.
I know.
Right.
Yep, okay.
Can I ask a point that I think, and help me if I'm wrong, this may be above my pay grade.
Okay.
When they sat down, when Mr. Campina sat down with the Board of Selectmen and he set his EDU rate, there was some discussion on whether or not that was an accurate rate. Now, given the fact we don't have any financial statements, I was real curious how it was an accurate rate. So when we start talking about budgeted surpluses and budgeted deficits, we don't even have a clue how to set an EDU rate because we don't have a grasp on what we're spending, what our costs are involved. So that EDU rate that you're sitting out there, to me, that's not the way to set an EDU rate. If you don't, well, I know, but my point is you may be paying more, or you may be paying less than what needs to be paid by the sewer users because we don't simply understand where our costs are. So when someone says, that looks about right, and does that, that's what happened.
That's not totally
No,
true.
he gave us the full thing
In defense of
I'm not saying it's
Mr. Champina, well, basically what he's doing is he's looking at his prior year's expenses. He's also looking during the course of the year what he spent in the various categories. He has line item detail as to what he needs to spend, and he is measuring continuously through our finance department, all right, what they're charging him for, okay? I know that's going on, and based on that, he's making his best estimation as to what his expenses will be the next year. Now, that may include, like this year, he had a whole bunch of new people that came on board, new connections, et cetera. He has to make his best estimate, all right? Typically, his number that he gives has to have some contingencies in it as well. One being emergency funds and items like that, all right? In case something goes wrong, he just can't be coming back and asking town meeting for, to pay a bill.
So that's
If
it.
something happens. So he's supposed to have, pretty much like we have a reserve fund in his budget as well. All
Okay.
right, the question is who authorizes the spending of that, all right? And that has to be very carefully looked at. All right, typically in a budget, you would always want to come in with a surplus because you would want all those contingency monies to fall, right? Or have him, during the course of the year, had, some additional amounts, not a large amount, and a small percentage that would be there in case he misjudged a number. And then in total, it should balance out. So I'm never concerned about some generation of free cash because of a budget surplus and something like this. Yeah, if it's $1 million, I'd be pretty excited. But, if I see 100, 150, 200,000, I'd say, hey, you know what? He planned for some things that didn't happen. Thank goodness. I hope next year that we plan as well and that we have as much luck. Mr.
All
Cameron?
right, a couple more things you guys can help me with here. Page 7, expenses of an enterprise fund. I understand most of it, down the last black dot on the left, it says indirect costs.
That would be basically billing, things of that nature.
Yes, those would be services provided by the town.
Okay.
And that would,
Also,
some of the key ones, as Larry just mentioned, would be the generation of
The bills
the
and things like
bills,
that.
all right, the postage, the stuffing of the envelopes, which is not a cheap item, et cetera.
Okay, but it seems to me to be a very broad statement. Are there any guidelines to that indirect cost? Are there any limitations to that indirect cost? Does the town have to prove its indirect cost?
Yeah.
In other words, they're sending out the bills to any company for using the sewer, sending out a bill. Is there a formula to cap that cost? Is that cost just made up? Can we put any number we want on that? General fund needs money. It might only cost us $20 to produce that bill. Can we charge $100?
They
Where are the guidelines to
tried
that?
that once.
Well, I know, that's what I'm getting at. Are there guidelines to that?
Well, the guideline, I'm sorry, go ahead, ma'am.
The answer to that is, I don't know, but we should appropriately ask the Board of Selectmen to that, because it
Charter
says here
policy.
that every town should have that. That's a policy. We can determine that ourselves, and we can decide what that's going to be. Earlier, I had this
She
conversation with
doesn't
Terry.
say that. Because in the
It
front, it
recognizes-
says the town accountant is responsible.
That's
The
what
board
I saw.
recommends that every community
Uh-huh,
establish
I know,
a
but
written
you don't get to say
internal,
what that is.
no, every community establish a written internal policy regarding the indirect cost allocation and should review the policy annually.
Well,
That
yeah.
is-
So-
Who does this?
That policies are the purview of the Board of Selectmen.
True.
Are there any in place now?
We would have
do
to ask.
not have the answer, we would
May
have.
I maybe reach to the other side of the table? No? Okay.
I don't, no, that's not fair.
Okay, that's it. All right, it's all right.
That's,
I won't put
that's,
him on the spot, that's cool.
that's putting them on the spot.
I got no problem with that, I got no problem with that, that's for another day.
Remember, there were times when none of our liaisons
That's
would
for
say
another day.
anything.
The reason why I asked that is, it just appears to be too broad of what is in this here, and is there any other, paperwork from the state or anything from the town that can lock that in a little, narrow that in a little more, Frank?
That would be done by the policy of the town. Right.
But is there one in effect?
I don't know, you
Okay.
asked me that.
Is the charter?
You just asked me the same
Sorry.
question two different ways.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
Ask him the third one, he's still on call.
Does the charter have
You've been in
anything?
court too much.
I know, does the charter have anything in it?
No, all the policies are in there, and actually, you know, I say the board of selectmen, but it's really the sewer commissioners,
I understand that.
right? And conjunction with, if we had separate sewer commissioners, it would be, the sewer, actually, then it would fall to the board of selectmen to work with the sewer commissioners to determine, you know, what was going to be charged over to them, and it would be like purchasing services. There might be some questions at that point, but right now, they're one and the same, so. I say the selectmen, but technically that might be the sewer commissioners, I don't know, I'd have to go back and reread it carefully. Bonnie, you had your hand up first, so.
It's okay. I mean, I really hate to drag out old business and things like that. But I understand where you're coming from, Dominic. It's like nobody wants to open up this can of worms that everybody thought we buried long ago. But I don't think it's ever going to be buried. And I was one of the people right from the beginning who said, if you could prove to me what it costs, I'd pay for it. Okay? But the problem is that nobody would prove to the sewer users that that's what it cost. Okay, when it came to these so-called indirect costs. Okay? And even Derek said it to me, and I understand where he was coming from when he said, I said, well, if you assessed those costs to the sewer enterprise fund, then you had to reduce them from the general fund. Okay? That's my concept, right? Derek says, well, we don't have to do that. We just put that revenue on the revenue sheet, therefore it covers those costs. But that's not what happened, right?
Thank you.
They would put those costs into revenues, okay, which allowed them to have all of the other extra things that we couldn't afford around here.
No, it's an
At the expense of the sewer users
Hold on.
and not everyone else.
I don't want to bring up the past history where there was an overcharge and we lost the town administrator because of how the calculation was done, et cetera. All right, but basically what happens is we do not transfer expenses for things like postage from the general fund to the sewer department.
No, we
What we
don't.
do is we have them pay the bill by transferring the revenue against the town expense. All right, it's an accounting issue, all right, and it does balance properly. It's hard for the average person, I think, has no accounting background at all, to understand what the heck is going
I'd
on.
like to see that
Right,
balance.
that's how it happens, okay, is,
Supposed
you
to
know, we say
happen.
we're gonna
Supposed
spend-
to happen.
where we spend
I'll say it
$100,000 in postage, 40,000 of that belongs to, you know, water pollution control. How do we get that bill paid by them? Easy, we transfer revenue over to the town of $40,000.
That
So
makes,
the town's number becomes a net of 60.
Right, Bonnie, you-
that makes perfect sense. That I understand, but that's not what was happening, and that's not what Derek just said to me.
No, I can clear this
Okay?
up too.
See, that is not what he said to me. When we're talking about salaries and people
There we go.
working, the town administrator's salary, okay, that is his job, whether it's on enterprise fund or not, but technically, when you read through this, they can assess a certain amount of his job function towards an enterprise fund as a manager of that.
Yes, we're all agreed.
Okay?
We're not doing it.
These are the things that is going to open up the can of worms that are gonna make everybody mad all over again. Because it has to be treated in a reasonable fashion that everybody can understand. And how can you assess and say, he might spend, 25% of his time that particular week on sewer issues, and that may be true. And maybe the town accountant has to spend 25% that particular week. But why, there has to be a reasonable way to figure it out. And I was not one of the
There, all
ones.
right, one, if you remember right, and I'm gonna go back to the history. All right, one of the reasons why there was an outburst between the town administrator at the time and the chairman of the board of selectmen is there was certain record keeping that has to be done, all right, that wasn't done. It was only estimated. All right, there are ways to do it, they are time consuming, all right, and I remember right, that particular argument had a lot to do with what it would take to put it together. All right, you are right, there is a way to do it, it can be done, it can be measured, all right, it just has to be set up, done, and tallied. It's done all the time in business. And reviewed, it's done in business all the time. All right, it's not, we don't need accounting geniuses to do it, we just need the manpower to go through it, that's all. And then also, I can tell you, I went back when I first came on the committee, and I went through it, and basically, at the time that it was done, the federal government had come back and said that for companies, they had to have full absorption costing, this was what their term was, in their inventories, which meant all indirect costs, including rent, light, heat, light, and power for every office, and all those kinds of things were to be included. All right, the analysis that I saw basically was full absorption costing based on what was done in business. Okay, that was not necessarily the right formula to be used for the town. Okay, so, and it was probably done for the basis of we want to get a few extra bucks. That may be the case, but it was not totally unfounded. Because I went in there with the attitude, I'm going to prove also that it was unfounded. And I looked at it and said, you know what? This is full absorption costing, which has a place in business under the federal income tax rules, right? But really didn't fit in with how, you know, a municipal enterprise fund should be run.
Yeah.
Right? Only the direct costs should really be in there.
Well, I absolutely understand that,
Right?
and I understand what you're getting at, but when it got to a point of absolutely, totally ridiculous, when a certain gentleman stood up in town meeting and said, if you don't charge these things to the enterprise fund, you're gonna turn off the street lights.
That's past history.
Okay.
That's past history. All we're looking at now, we have an amount that's being charged. It should be the correct amount. It should be fully documented as to what it is. All right, and, you know, when we have changes in healthcare costs, we have changes in
Oh,
postage,
definitely.
all that should all be estimated and be part of the fee. Nobody's disagreeing with it. All right, but I don't want to go back to the old history that just because it's being done, that, you know, it's a place to manipulate and have fun with. That's not the case.
Well, I would hope not, and that's what, you know, I worry about these issues coming down the road with these veterans that
That's just not,
somebody's gonna have to pay for,
that's right.
and how we're gonna figure that out. And even setting the sewer rate for future upcoming years. You know, the whole process needs to be looked at. We have become a more, I can't say industrial, but certainly there's more commercial property or commercial ventures going on in this town, where I think it's outlived the EDU thing above and beyond.
Those are, you might be right, but really not part of our, you know, situation. We can advise when they come back. So we may see some other things. I would also say that one of the things that was very obvious in the debt which I've raised, all right, we're talking about not using any stabilization money on the town side. Town debt is a little $2.9 million. And we have $600,000 in the stabilization fund. It is more than adequately covered for debt purposes and for debt rating. However, we have $31 million worth of sewer and zero. Now, who should put up the stabilization money for the sewer debt? Should be the enterprise fund. Should be the enterprise fund.
Yeah.
And that needs to be reasonably explained to everybody, understand that means if our expenses are gonna go up that much more if we don't have a stabilization in there, because we're gonna have to pay more to borrow money, et cetera. Okay, so you need that fund in there to say, hey, we're okay, and let's find out how maybe we can use our surpluses over the, you know, next few years, et cetera, to build the stabilization out of the free cash, et cetera. There are ways to do all this, it's just, it's never been approached. It's maybe time to start looking at it and say we have to take a rational approach to this. All right, and get everything in line so the right people are putting up monies, all right, and other people are not being penalized or being asked to assume other people's obligations.
One other question.
Okay,
I'm sorry, no, go ahead.
Marilyn, and then Tom, you're next. So when she's done, I'll let you talk. Marilyn?
4 years ago, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, I heard the same comments. We know it needs to get done. How is it going to get done? Is there, I know we put money into the budget, or he asked for money for a part-time financial person to look forward at that. Do we have accounting resources available now to start on this? We've identified the problem. We've always known this problem exists. How do we fix it?
It has to be done at the water pollution control level, quite frankly. I know they have put in for a temporary with financial background to help him with his billings, et cetera, and I think the person he's looking for will also have some financial reporting experience. He's been asking for help. Again, that's up to the town manager. Actually, it's up to the municipal maintenance director, because that's who he reports to.
So, which
And we, go ahead, what else?
basically just the final, I'd like to put period on the direct costs versus the indirect costs, but I wanted to look back here to see if in fact they are billing any indirect costs, which I don't believe we do have in this budget.
The indirect costs are, well, first off, you can't bill, that's what I was saying, you can transfer. Now, if you
Sorry.
look on the revenue
You
side,
have to budget, I shouldn't say bill, you should budget for them.
if
They
you
must
look
be
on the
counted
revenue
for.
side, on the town side, you will see an amount coming in from the water pollution control. That includes any direct costs that are being charged. That's inclusive of the billings, the postage, other items that are identified, pension, healthcare, et cetera.
So we've broken out employee health care, and we have fringe.
We have no
like-
breakout, they are just inclusive. We don't have a breakout.
Actually, it's broken out here. I'm looking at water pollution control, because I have 2 line items. on the
Yes,
revenue
but they're
side.
not broken out, there's so many things in there.
Okay. I'm looking at a line item that says employee health insurance costs.
Okay, that wasn't there last year, but go ahead, so you have
Okay.
that.
So then I'm looking at
Where's the
another line,
where's the pension?
that's not broken out.
No, it's in the healthcare line.
Okay, so, all right, I'm sorry, it is broken out. Thank you. I have the Medicare, workers' comp and
I'm
retirement.
not trying to be far, I'm just saying,
No, all right,
there's
it
some
is
general
broken out,
population.
you're confusing me now. All right, so we have, these are appropriately broken out and attributed to water pollution control. But to the actual cost, when Derek was saying 25% of his time, municipal maintenance time, all of those other departmental times are not reflected. We are not.
There is an
dealing-
We
administrative.
don't know that. We don't know that.
No, it's-
We do not know that, we do not have a breakout of those administrative costs. I haven't seen one.
We don't have a line item for administrative costs on the revenue side.
or it's buried in something.
Or it's buried in one of those 2 numbers.
Okay.
How many times have we looked at the title and the title has not truly reflected everything in the account? That's not to say that there is anything that's gone, all I can tell you is, we don't have a breakout. It's like trying to find out what's in the retained earnings. Nobody can tell us.
This is not, this is just for my information. Who owns the sewer department's land? And do they pay rent to the town? How does that get charged?
Big can of worms, Bill.
And if they start having solar,
Now you're gonna ask me, where the hell's the in lieu, where are the in lieu
Yeah,
tax?
that was my
Where's the in lieu
question.
tax
We
number?
got rid of those, but it wasn't inappropriate, it is allowable, we just voted not to do it, so.
Sure.
It's town land,
it's town land.
yes.
So if they put up a solar collector to lower their energy bill, the town should get revenue
That
from
depends on
that.
how the contract's written.
And it also depends upon the decision of the board of selectmen as to what the policy will be as to how it's
Right.
I
represented.
thought that was voted at town meeting with I'm sorry, an amendment that said that it goes back to the sewer enterprise fund.
Allow us to-
If so, then that's what would be done, it would be whatever's in there. I'd refer you back to whatever the amendment was.
Yeah,
Then the question is, how does it get back there? You just have to make sure it happens.
yeah.
Well, it would seem to me that if it's on town land, albeit it is an initiative to make it happen, then the revenue from that should be the town's revenue.
Yeah, but,
Well, the intent was to
Just save
make
costs.
the enterprise fund totally energy self-sufficient. We're gonna pay it one way or another.
I
Okay,
understand
So
that.
what they're saying is the idea is to give him an
I
incentive.
understand that, but the
Right, so let
sewer,
him
the
use it.
sewer users will benefit, whereas the town should benefit.
It's not gonna happen in the next.
Never mind. Forget, I just want, I was in,
Let's move on.
that was the idea, was to save.
I don't wanna drag the dead horse out any
And
longer.
make
One of
money
the-
off of it.
Right, one of the other things you have to understand is within the next couple of years, all rainwater is gonna have to be processed through the sewer plant. I don't think anybody's figured out how they're gonna charge the rest of the town for that water.
Really?
Okay, yes,
I like
that's by
that.
federal mandate. You just
Really?
cannot pour water into rivers, lakes, and all that kind of ponds or open ocean anymore. Right, without.
You can't rain in the open
That was
ocean
brought up in the
anymore, right?
No,
presentation.
you can't put rainwater in,
There
it's
was a
been collected
pushback.
and pushed back.
On
Well,
that.
okay,
Storm drains and stuff.
storm drains and
Yeah, I'm
stuff,
just-
right.
I know,
She's
I
giving
know,
me a
I
hard
know,
time.
I know.
So then, that even has been discussed, how are we gonna charge the town for that process?
Sewer
I don't
users-
know, I don't know.
The sewer
I
users
don't
will
have an
pay,
answer.
and those, somebody won't pay.
Not in my pay grade, as everybody's saying. Any other questions on this?
Sorry. I have one more. I promise, only one more.
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
promise, one more. We just voted on an article at town meeting regarding the benefits. Don't laugh, Larry. In this book I read, I don't see any place in here that we can put that money, where we're gonna come up with that money to pay for it. It can't come out of the fund now.
What benefits are you?
The betterment, they put that cap on the betterment, $18,000, but it cost more than that.
Yes,
What I read in this book, it says that you can't put money from the general fund into the enterprise fund. Unless it comes from, there was only, I think it just said free cash only. And only if the enterprise fund has a deficit. Now, the enterprise fund does not have a deficit. I read this, I didn't see any legal way to put money into the fund to pay that betterment. Unless I'm not reading it right, unless I'm asking the question wrong.
your point being,
Point being is, how are we gonna pay for that money that we gotta come up with because of the betterment? In this, it says we can only put money into the enterprise fund if there is a deficit.
the selectmen have been discussing the use of retained earnings and the use of any
Retained earnings
use
from the enterprise
for the
fund.
enterprise fund.
Okay.
And any retained earnings usage has to be approved by
But
town meeting.
at town meeting, they said that the sewer users would not be penalized to do that. If it comes out of retained earnings from the enterprise fund, that money is from the sewer users. That's not what we voted on. And I can't see any legal way in this that it says it. It's above my pay grade.
It's above my pay grade to settle
Okay,
this.
I'll let it go, I've said my point.
We're getting into areas that they
All right,
are
I'll
not,
let it go.
we're getting into areas that they as a committee are not prepared to discuss with us.
I have no further questions,
And
Your
that was
Honor.
something I told them that they would.
No further questions, Your
I'm
Honor.
sorry, now,
Okay,
you're gonna say,
anyway,
okay, okay,
One point, it has nothing to do with pay.
Okay.
We voted for a cap, that's all we voted for.
That's it.
yes, they did not go
Because we
through
voted
source
for
of
a
funds.
cap
Yeah.
is the difference. We didn't vote any rules, regulations, whatever. And you're probably most likely
Well,
page
it was said, but maybe it wasn't
Page
in
six.
the right, it might have been said, okay. Yeah.
Somewhere after the third goal and then number 3, there's a possibility that nothing's been discussed.
Thank you, Al.
Remember, there's a cap, it was not.
Only
you
capital.
subsidized, you look for subsidizing the capital project. That's all I can say.
Just a dumb question, because I don't know the logistics of it. When they borrowed to do these projects, is that town debt or sewer enterprise debt?
Sewer enterprise debt.
Is it, so it's directly sewer enterprise debt to start with?
It's listed that way, you'll notice that John puts it down. Not only that, but there's usually some state funding and stuff associated with it.
Okay. So you like, there's no way to get it out one way or the other?
Thanks, son.
Yes.
To answer a previous speaker. Through you, to the previous speaker. Tom, on page 35, number 8,
Say
discusses
again,
payment.
page 35.
Number 8, though, this goes to payment in lieu of taxes. What happened is, yes, you can charge payment in lieu of taxes because it sits on town land, so the town could charge. And at one point in our history, we were doing that. And the sewer users got really upset and said, we don't want to do that anymore. We've stopped doing that. That came out of the budget 5 or 6 years ago.
That's part of the $1 million show.
That was, yeah,
Yeah,
well, no, actually, it was a separate line item on top of the $1 million. That was even worse. We had an administrative fee, which didn't break anything out.
That was the fully absorbed cost that I was talking
But
about.
we also had the pilot, payment in lieu of taxes was allowable, can be done. We, as a town, voted not to do it at this point. So
Okay.
they have this.
That was part of the second show, Frank.
The horse is dead.
That wasn't part of the first show.
The horse is dead.
Dominic and I came in through the first show.
That's right. We saw the first rerun. We didn't see any reruns. We saw the original.
Now, all right, obviously, everybody did take a look at it. I'm glad that you did.
I did, my friends
Some
in the
articles
jury
will be-
room were laughing
Some
at me.
articles will be approaching us, all right? Or there will be some other conversations related to the retained earnings, et cetera. I just think we need to know, and I know that there's some question about getting some help from Mr. Champina on the financial side. I'm hoping we support that, so that he finally has the reports, and we can finally get the information. Next time on the agenda was the invitation to the school committee for next Wednesday for
6 o'clock.
to discuss labor matters. We'll be at 6 o'clock. They will be here, they want to be here. They expect pretty much that not only the superintendent, but the rest of the school committee will be here as well. It's set for the 13th because the superintendent is not in town on the 20th or the 27th of February. So that
Or the
pushes it.
16th.
Yeah, pardon? Did I say the 16th? No, you remember the original, Saturday's a good day.
I'll get a ball.
No, all right, it's on the 13th, that's what it says on here on the agenda. All right, they will be here, I expect it won't take any more than an hour, 'cause all they can basically do is discuss with us what their alternatives are. They're so labor intensive that they don't have too many other areas that they can move with. All right, but they very much want to come talk to us. They will bring their attorney, all right, who will advise us if the conversation drifts into areas that cannot be covered by executive session. Okay?
This is an executive session?
It would be an executive session because it has to do with labor relations, negotiations, et cetera. All right? They're gonna present some alternatives. Your 85% of your expenses are labor, right? And, the question is what can they and cannot discuss with us as alternatives to what their current budget is. That doesn't mean anything will come to fruition, it's just they want to lay out, okay, these are the alternatives we have. There'll be no discussion of decisions or whatever, they just want to give us, again, a forewarning, so we're not shocked when they actually come through with what they have to come through with. If anything. You don't know, Don?
You said 6, right? No,
6 o'clock, yes. They meet at 7, so,
Okay.
they would like to meet with us, and they basically have to be out of here by 10 of, so they can walk across the parking lot. I put on here also the fiscal year 2014 capital budget discussion. We have no capital items in the budget, and I don't know how we're going to get away with that. So when we talk
That makes
about,
sense.
when we talk about we have $200,000 because of the school, we have Cape saying that we need stuff, we're also hearing from, like, we're short cruisers. And the radio situation is tricky. And there's other items also that I hear when I hear capital planning. The buses, definitely. There's a huge problem there as to what's going to happen in the buses. Not only that, but even who's going to make a decision on that. Because the ad hoc committee, the action committee that was put together, I think has done its work in its entirety. It went out, it got bids, it was able to bring the school accounting for the transportation to an equitable basis so that you can compare them. I think it really next has to go to both the Board of Selectmen and the school committee to decide for the town, how much money they want to spend on buses, for the school committee, what are they going to do and to meet service levels with the money available from the town. So I know that's where I stand on it. I do not know when the next meeting of that committee will occur because we're short one member. We have to wait for a member to be appointed. to let you know.
Tuesday,
That,
on the agenda for Tuesday.
that doesn't mean they'll meet on Wednesday. All right, that's as far as we can go right now. That's all we have.
When you talk about the 2014 capital budget discussion, you should, I mean, it's inconceivable not to anticipate that there's some capital needs. So if there's zero budget, then we should at least have a list of those things that should be considered.
There is, you have a capital plan. There's a capital plan in your book.
In here?
In your book, yes, there is. And list what, for 2014, each of the department heads requested.
Do you remember as a kid, you got the J.C. Penney Christmas wish book, and you went through and marked everything you wanted?
That's exactly.
Probably
what it
didn't
is.
get any of it?
Yeah.
That's what's happening.
Okay. But there's no, they're not assessed in any priority or,
Oh, no, they are.
Sense
They're
of
done as a
urgency.
priority and everything.
Yeah.
All right, next item on the agenda is the unanticipated items within the last 48 hours. Last night, the selectmen voted for hold a special town meeting, the same evening as the town meeting related to 2014 on April 22nd. There's a whole set of dates, and we're going to have to also vet these articles as well. I don't know what the articles are. All right, can we do a joint schedule?
Sure.
And can we move in color so we can see, you know, red is this meaning and blue is that meaning? I mean, you're gonna get really basic because with this old people.
Yeah, color game costs more, Frank.
I know.
I'll buy her mine.
All right, yeah, well, that would be very helpful. I'd also remind you, I would imagine that there will definitely be financial articles on here. I suspect that we will see a lot more transfer requests this year than we've seen in prior years because of the problems we had last year at the last minute with the $5,000 or 3%, whichever's the greater issue. The Department of Revenue got pretty bent out of shape again, and said that last year should be the last time they see the problem. So I suspect that's why this has been brought up as well. Mr. Sullivan was very astute on some items like that. Okay? Want to make you aware of that, I remember the special town meeting
I'm
stuff.
sorry,
will be
I'm
like-
sorry. Can I stop
Yes.
this? I just back up a little bit? Kelly, what's this gonna do to your timeline? I mean, because you had, I've written over here, 13th to get the warrant, right? This was on the schedule number 1.
Yep.
Then, but now it says Board of Selectmen should officially close the warrant March 19th.
That's the special
That's
town
the
meeting.
special.
That's the special. This is new.
I know, but we
Yeah.
usually got them together. So you're telling me we're gonna get this
We're
one
gonna
day
get
and
it,
this
we're
one
gonna
week
get it
later?
a week later.
Yes.
Hey, babe, gotcha, okay.
However, it still has to go to the printer at the same time.
Exactly.
Yeah,
That's gonna crunch us.
Mhm.
Right, and so that's why the other thing that we need to do right away is as soon as we get this, you know, get the warrant from the selectmen, all right, we've got to go through there and figure out who has to come in and get them in here as fast as possible.
Okay.
All right, it's gonna, you know, I have no idea how many articles we're gonna have. I really don't. There's no way to tell on one.
We will have an idea of any departments or committees or their articles. We'll have an idea of those prior, because those are due next Friday.
Yes,
But how many of those, I don't know, but any
That's the
petition articles are a few weeks after that.
and I have we don't know, sometimes the petition are one or two, and sometimes there are a dozen, and we have no way of knowing. I think the thing is not to wait, as soon as we get the department ones, we start calling people in and start going through the stuff.
Cool, okay.
All right, we're gonna be hard pressed, we're also gonna be short chairman. Any other questions?
No, I was good, I'm sorry.
Anyone have any liaison reports?
I'm sorry, I did have a question on that last. Just to clarify the procedure, when we publish the warrant in the local newspaper, does that need to have our comments included?
We don't publish it in the newspaper.
Okay, that's the board of
That's the
selectmen that
board
do
of
that.
select, yes.
So we only have to have our comments and our
In
votes
that,
in.
in the booklet,
The booklet was going to go out
to the
to
printer.
the printer for town meeting.
Right.
Which generally goes to the printer 14 days before, 14 or 15 days before, because we actually have to be able to have it available for distribution 7 days before.
Mhm,
Okay, that's what controls that.
mhm.
Okay, any liaison reports? Anybody have a liaison report? Not seeing
Oh,
none?
well, you know what, it's not a liaison report, but can I make just a brief statement? Has there ever been you know, we're always looking at slashing and cutting, has there ever been a group to do the research on maybe, you know, revenues? You know, to look at how maybe the town can make money rather than cut money. Has there ever been a group to do that? Or a committee to do that through you, Mr. Chair?
The selectman directed the town administrator, I think about 3 or 4 weeks ago, on a program they were looking at of basically working with 4 different focus groups to start the process of looking at what Wareham needs to do to go forward for, you know, this, both, you know, they're looking at, you know, commercial development, housing development, tourist, all those types of things. They identified 4 areas that they need focus groups.
And
That's
you-
really what they're waiting on right now, is, and that'll start the ball rolling, we
They
hope.
they left that as the town administrator to get that rolling?
Yes.
So I said, okay, I'll ask again another day.
He's the best facilitator for that. Like I said, there's 4 groups that have identified, and one of the executive vice presidents of Bridgewater State has agreed to be the facilitator, which is fantastic.
Okay, I'll start what's going on with that, thank you.
Okay? Any other?
I don't have a report, but I would also like to make a statement and express my frustration in dealing with the press. The Wareham Courier doesn't actually even have a reporter that shows in town, as far as I can tell, to cover our meetings. We've not had,
Not the only, do they cover the full selectmen's
right,
meeting?
they've not come here, and Wareham Week obviously doesn't. I'm not sure, but I think it's really important that we get this information out there. At this point, as I mentioned informally at the beginning of the meeting, one of the things that I do is read what is written in the paper and some of the comments afterwards to try to correct perceptions, to make sure that correct information is getting out there. But the gist of what we're saying is not really happening. I'm not really sure how to correct that. We've asked.
One of the ways, one of the ways to cover that too is, Wareham Week also agreed at one point to meet with us to discuss what we're going to be doing. That appointment was never set up. We can try to set that up ahead of time. I'll put it on the agenda for next week, because I have some other ideas too, especially with the department head meetings, where we might be able to follow up on that and the press, right, or, you know, with WCTV or whatever. I think it's an issue to be discussed, because I think we need to get more information out to our constituents. All right, we were put here by the town meeting, it's time we started informing the town, and probably the best way, the format, as I thought it over, the best way to do it is the department heads have given us the perfect format by department, all right, and we can, you know, talk about what they presented to us and where they are, all right, and what we're facing as a town. I think that's probably the first step, and the best people is, we have tapes of everything they did. So it's a question of making sure we just get it right.
And that's a perfect example.
In
There
the
was,
meantime, I think you and I, for the time being, since I'm filling in with Donna, that we should try to get a hold of, you know, like Wareham Week, and we can do it with the Standard Times and the Wareham Courier too. Try to make arrangements to meet with the publisher or the editors in chief, and sit down and say, you know, some ideas. So one of the things I proposed, at least to Wareham Week, right, was, you know, I said, give us a little space and we'll call it For the Record. All right, so that when things come up, we can put something in your paper, won't cost you anything to have written, that'll be factual, that will straighten out these messes rather than having your site messed up and you know, the reporting not being clear. So we need to just follow up on that. Now, it's critical.
it's critical going in, because the more information, the more correct information the public has, the less we have to argue this stuff on town meeting floor.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I'll put that on the schedule for the 30th next meeting, but we can't really discuss it in total tonight. Minutes for January 30th, I suppose everybody's read them. Can I have a motion
I need to accept the
to
minutes.
accept them?
Second?
And second, anyone have any corrections? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
I wasn't here.
It's 5, what?
No, I wasn't here.
600. You weren't here?
I'm not sure, I think.
You weren't, it's 501, I'm sorry, it's 501.
The second?
He was not here, he has to abstain.
Where was I here?
No, I don't believe so.
I was here.
Oh,
So I will no longer abstain.
600. All right, at this time, the board will be going into executive session to discuss staffing, labor contracts, current litigation, and litigation potentials. Thank you all for coming. Mr. White, when we're done?
Don't we have to vote to go into?
Yes, I need a motion to go into executive session.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? 600. Mr. McDonald, you'll have to take notes.